subject to other constituent councils, council approves an amendment to the charter, to the Irrawater Charter, to allow the Irrawater Board to appoint members of its audit committee.
Now, is this an amendment to the current motion?
Yes.
Thank you.
No, sorry, don't.
I don't think you can do that. No. I think that's contrary, in fact, to number 2.
It's a policy on the run. There's no evaluation of the policy implications of that change.
I am advised by my CEO properly that this is making policy on the run and we should not do it without having something on notice. So I have to reject that.
Thank you, Mayor Parker.
Do you wish to speak on the current motion?
No.
This is your only opportunity.
Fine, I will. I won't be supporting the motion as it stands. All of our other regional subsidiaries, the boards of those subsidiaries appoint members of their audit committee. I believe that this is probably an error in the development of the charter to begin with, that it has to be a convoluted process where all 3 councils have to unanimously decide on who's actually going to be appointed to the audit committee, a subcommittee of another regional subsidiary which we appoint members to as well. This is complete and utter too much oversight for a subcommittee of a regional subsidiary of all 3 councils, and I don't think that we should be doing it. I won't be supporting this because it is going to be audit season coming up, financial documents coming up, and if we don't have an audit committee at Irrawater and we can't get financial reports prepared and through an audit committee and signed off in time for our council to actually issue financial records, and in fact all 3 councils to issue financial records, we're going to be in some strife. And I think we need an audit committee over there, and to leave them without an audit committee for potentially 2 to 3 months while they go through a process, I think is unacceptable. So I won't be supporting the motion as it stands because things need to happen over there and they can't be left in the lurch.
No more speakers, so Councillor Monceau, you may sum up.
Tonight was the first time we were presented with this opportunity to discard or to support this recommendation. So it's not that we could have done something about this 6 months ago. We couldn't because we didn't know about it until tonight. I have some concerns in relation to the document that we've been presented for the next motion, a recommendation for tonight, where the budget doesn't add up. And so if the audit committee has already approved this budget and it doesn't add up, then I have some concerns about those people. But that was not the issue. For me, it is still an issue of process. And yes, I do understand what Councillor Cornish has said about the audit committees being appointed by other councils, and I do respect those comments. But the issue is that the charter is different for Irrawater, and that we have to change the charter, and thank you for your attempt. But until that charter is changed, I think there actually could be some advantages of having totally independent people look at this whole project anyway. So for me, it is not necessarily, although I am concerned about errors in this document, I am unhappy about us just carte blanche rolling over for another 2 years. I would be, if I was allowed to add another clause to that motion, I would have been quite happy to have added another, extend their role for 3 months if that was legitimate until the new process could take place. But that wasn't possible for me to do. It is about appropriately finding people who are independent accountants to look at the books. It's not running Irrawater Board. The board runs itself. It is giving advice and it's a judgment and a check to see whether the finances are being controlled appropriately. At least that's the way I see it for the audit committee. I do believe that we should be as transparent as possible. It is not about being simple. Yes, it would be so much more simple to be able to just go ahead and say, tick, 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 yes, they'll all be fine, that's okay. The issue for me is it should be open, it should be transparent, it may be that we end up with exactly the same 3 people, But I want to see the process clear, transparent, and without any issues of we're trying to do something that we shouldn't be doing. I want it to be open and honest. And I hope you'll support it.
Thank you. I put the motion as it stands. All those in favour? Those against? Motion is lost. So I call for an alternative motion on this matter. Councillor Davis?
I move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a second of the officer's recommendation? Councillor Cornish? Any debate on this matter? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Those against? Motion's carried. Division's been called by Councillor Monceau. All those in favour, please stand. Those in favour are Councillors Lemon, Wilkins, Davis, Piggott, Davey and Cornish. Those against are Councillors Monceau and Ford. Motion is carried. We now stay on the subject of Earl Water and we have their draft budget long-term financial plan put to us by the Earl Water Board, which is on page 25. The recommendation is that, it's quite a long recommendation, and councillors might like to read that in context of some recommendations from our own audit committee, but it is up, that's before you. This has been pulled by you, Councillor Monceau.
I support the first three recommendations. I would like to see the fourth one deleted. Number 5 is fine, and I have given Robert a copy of what would replace as number 5, please. I'll just give some time for that to be typed up. Okay. That's it, I think. Yes, that's it. All right, first of all, I'll explain why the deletion of the original number 4. There is no supporting business case that justifies this action. We have given the responsibility to the Earl Water Board to make the decisions, and they are the best informed to do so. Until this project has been commissioned and we know how much water there is, that we can actually harvest, we can't start selling it. Thirdly, the priority is to supply, and not only selling it, but when we can actually do so. The priority is to supply our 3 councils with the water for our ovals and reserves to make sure that the system works for us, because we've paid for it. Until we know how much water we'll actually have available, we cannot go out and sell to other people. Until we know what the price of water will be, it cannot happen. So that word immediately is wrong. Apart from the fact that any contracts that we may have or make, and we find we can't actually supply the water, we are in drowning mode, potentially financially. We should not be selling water to outside markets, or every litre sold will be subsidised satisfy our ratepayers. That's clause 4. Now, the reason for adding clause 6 is one that you know that I have been on about since November of 2 years ago, probably earlier than that. We do need to know what the Era Water Board needs to support and guide them financially. We know that they are trying to resurrect and they are trying to salvage a project that is financially in difficulty. Partly because the project has taken such a long time to progress, as well as the additional costs that were never factored in when we got our first prudential report. We owe it to our ratepayers to optimise the financial viability of Era Water. One day, we may have to do something more drastic with this project. But in the meantime, we may have to downsize it to keep supplying our 3 councils, irrespective of the losses. But I want someone other than Holditch to advise us, someone like, there are a number of different forensic accountant firms out there who've got lots of experience. We have relied on Holditch for too long. They are not independent. They are conflicted. We have a duty of care to our ratepayers, and this must be done. If we don't, we are ignoring our responsibilities and handing over this responsibility to the next council to do it. By doing so, we are supporting the board. By doing this, we're actually supporting the board in helping them to develop a proper business case that is in the interests of our ratepayers. Every one of us sitting, most of us sitting in this room. We need a professional business case, and I believe that that would provide it. I am concerned with some issues in relation to this budget where the figures just do not tally on page 33 and on page 34. I'm no accountant, but I simply add those figures up and they don't actually add up. There are issues in relation to the running of this project because the real operating cost is $847,000 a year as of next year. Because we are not figuring in the interest on the loan. There is an admission at last that this project is losing money. The Burnside share of the loss of $375,000 is $124,900, but there is also the interest cost of $472,000 a year on the $12.6 million loan at 3.75 is capitalised on that loan. So I have some concerns, and that is why I have recommended in this way.
Thank you. I seek a seconder. Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with the adjustment to the motion that Councillor Monso has put forward for similar reasons. I think that we are in a period of some lack of clarity about the operation and function of ERA water. There have been questions raised about catchment and reserves and how long that will take to achieve. There's a further expenditure signalled here of $0.456 million to expand the scheme at a time when we don't have other customers, and there's also certain adjustments being made. For example, to the cash account decreased by $0.84 million, and then there's the issue of interest being capitalised and so on. So I think there is a lack of clarity. I do think that we need some independent persons to come in from outside with a fresh look at how things are situated. I think that in this circumstance it would be out of order to urge that the board seek water sales to third parties when we're not in a secure position. So for that reason I support the motion.
Thank you. I just remind councillors that we passed a motion last meeting asking the board to have an independent forensic review of the and evaluation of the business, and we are effectively doubling up on that if the board actually picks us up on that. But you may or may not have forgotten that, or this could be a different context. Motion's been moved and seconded. Councillor Piggott.
Just on that, Mr Mayor, could I ask a question? Could I just clarify what the motion was last time? Could someone look that up for me?
Why we move that then? Last week.
Thank you, Councillor Monso. We will sort it out for ourselves.
I suppose I could have done it actually. That's what I've got administration for.
Councillor Monso, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, if it's confidential, it might be a problem.
Maybe we should move in confidence then.
Mr Mayor, if it was in confidence, I'm happy to progress without it. Yeah, I'm happy to progress without it.
Thank you.
Look, I'm happy to. I'm going to support this motion. At the risk of doubling up, and perhaps we can sort that out later if we have done that. But I actually, I'd like to just discuss Councillor Monso's position on this. The clause she's taken out in regard to us suggesting they push on and sell water is something she's been asking for the last 2.5 years. So I don't see why actually we don't do it now. The long-term financial plan assumes that in the next year they sell 200 megalitres of water to the 3 councils, and the following year they need to sell something like that again to third parties. So going out now and sourcing people to take that water under certainly conditions in regard to covering ourselves that if we don't have the water, all sorts of things you can do ahead of time, as we could have done 2 years ago possibly at Councillor Monso's suggestion. So I think that's not really, it's not appropriate. I don't think they take their foot off the pedal in regard to finding third parties to take water. It was always a key part of this project to have councils take their water as we've agreed and then sell water to other people, and we need to get on and do that. The fact we haven't got it in the motion I don't think makes much difference. I assume that is something that is very much central to the board. In regard to the number 5, I agree with that as well. I spoke last time, and perhaps I can't talk about that because it was in confidence, but I don't have a problem with number 5. I think I would be very keen. I don't have Councillor Monso's cast aspersions on BRM Holditch. I don't have the same view in respect to that. I think that's a little unfair. Having said that, I'm quite happy to see what someone else with skills says about this. I assume that one of the options going forward that the mover would accept is that we would continue with the business as was always planned, which is not one of the choices. But that is also obviously an option to be. So whereas I'm a little confused about the motives of the mover, I actually think it is the right thing to do, and I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Wilkins.
Oh, thank you. Yes, my turn. I actually wanted to ask a question of the administration. Have we finished actually building this system, putting all the equipment in place, etc., etc.? And have we done any commissioning? Have we produced any water from that which is stored in the aquifer?
Through the chair, the commissioning is scheduled to be completed end of November, and it's expected to be operational from beginning of December. So we're currently in the process of connecting, getting the connections to all the reserves for the councils.
Another question supplementary, there is actually no water being actually tested or drawn from the aquifer at this stage? No.
Through the chair, not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
There's a further question which you should ask, which I'll ask for you, and because what the risk, what are the risks remaining? And essentially the infrastructure is built, water is being injected, but of course there's not much point in harvesting it, no one wants any. But the critical test is what does the aquifer actually hold the water we hoped it might? And the answer to that, when I last heard, which was about a week ago, was that the probability is 70% and rising. So there's been nothing has yet happened to make the professionals believe that the original assumptions will not be valid in terms of what the aquifer holds. Councillor Davis.
I'd like to move an amendment. And it's the amendment suggested by Councillor Pigott, that in point 5 the options can include continuing with the business, I suppose. As planned. Comma, yeah, that's it.
I would personally regard that as redundant. There are only options that can include. There can do many, many things, and obviously I would say that was self-evident, but I won't argue against it if you wish to have it in there.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
I'm happy to accept that as an amendment, and maybe the mover and second happy to accept that as the original motion.
I don't think it's necessary.
I've made that point. I'm just asking you, would you accept it?
I don't think it's necessary.
The answer is she won't accept it. The answer won't accept it, so we have an amendment. We have an amendment. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Davey.
The reason why I think it's very necessary is that when you go to this forensic accountant and you say, hey, why don't we sell it? Why don't we downsize it? Why don't we get rid of the whole business? And say, what do you think about those options? And we want you to comment on only those options. What kind of message does that send to them? And I think that shows the intention of this motion is to find the problem. Okay. So the reason behind this is because we're going to them saying that there are a number of options and we're making a genuine inquiry, not hoping to find the answer that we want, which potentially, and I think as the original mover or the original motion was, that it's a terrible thing and then there's a whole bunch of problems, there's a whole bunch of money missing. So that's my fear, and that's why I think that I would hope that everyone here would support that, because we wouldn't want to give that impression to an independent forensic accountant. In relation to point 4, I think the board will continue to go ahead and sell. That is what this council has been calling on for years by the mover, and I think potentially by the seconder, if I can recall correctly. But that's what we've always been doing, and like any business, of course, you're going to go and find out new customers. So I very much hope, and I presume that the board will completely ignore that because we haven't told them not to, so they'll go ahead and do it anyway. And I think that's appropriate. In relation to point 5, I'm happy to go and do that. I think it's potentially a waste of money, considering that we've already asked the board to do that. We should probably wait to see what they say. But in terms of a forensic accountant, all they're going to look at is the assumptions we made. We made a whole bunch of assumptions. If this is true, this is true, this is true, then this is going to be true. So all they're going to be able to do is go through and find that. They're not going to sit there like the ATO would and audit somebody's books and find that they've been embezzling money off to Ireland because they have a royalties payback system into Ireland. They're not going to find that. That's just not there. So the whole idea around this forensic accountant thing, I think, is very much over the top, but I'm happy to indulge the mover and support it anyway. They're going to look at our assumptions. That's all they're going to do. They're going to look at our assumptions. So it's really not dramatic. And if our assumptions are wrong, we might have, I think we should get a second opinion if it's so concerning. This is a big project for our city. We need to make sure that it's right. And having a second opinion, sure. But I wouldn't trash Holdish along the way. Yes, we've relied on them, but we haven't relied on them for far too long. If we want to get a second opinion, that's fine. We've done that about trees and a whole bunch of things. But it's not that the first arborist, that we need to sit here and trash the first arborist saying that he's got a conflict of interest or whatever. But if we want to get a second opinion on the financial viability, they need to consider the assumptions that we've made. and we'll get their view of it. I'm not sure what a forensic accountant's going to do, but you know, they're going to look at it and find that it's a very simple balance sheet, but there you go. But otherwise, I'm happy to support this amended motion.
Councillor Davey, you seconded the amendment. Do you wish to speak to it? Thank you. The amendment's been moved and seconded. Any further debate on the amendment? Then I will put that amendment. All those in favour? Against? The amendment is carried. The amended motion becomes the motion. Any further debate? Councillor Cornish.
Just a quick question, certainly with the costs to Burnside ratepayers for a forensic accountant. Do we have a ballpark in terms of what that might actually be to do this sort of fishing expedition?
$15,000.
Okay, thanks.
Debate's closed. Councillor Monso, your motion.
Yes, I have been on about sales, and I have been concerned about sales, and I know that the board are still pursuing sales, so both Councillor Piggott and Councillor Davis were right in that aspect, in that respect. They're not going to stop looking for it, but my concern was this, it was almost like telling the board that they have to do something immediately, and they are already doing that, and I'm very concerned that if they did something immediately and we forced them into trying to sign contracts right now, before the system is commissioned, before we know that the water quality is good enough, before we know we've got the volume of water that we want, then we might be getting ourselves into contractual issues that might cost all three councils a huge amount of money to get out of. I want this project to work, but I've always been concerned about its financial viability, and I have continually discussed that and brought up issues in relation to it. I do think it is important that we do get an independent person or persons or organisation to look at this, and I think at $15,000 it is cheap at that cost, because we're talking about millions and millions of dollars over 20 years. And it would be great to be able to get a lot of that money back through sales. I'm not optimistic in that relation, in relation to that, unless the project was to grow much bigger than it already is. And if that's a direction that this analysis might bring to the board, then that would be a good recommendation to the board. Or it might, if the recommendation goes the other way, it might be saying, hey, just keep it compact, do the things that are best for the project, for our three councils who are paying for it. That might be the best recommendation, but I want to hear it independent, somebody completely different to give us that kind of advice. It is necessary to be done. I mean, at the moment, the water is rather badly polluted from a lot of the wash off from the Felixstowe Reserve and all the work that's been happening in there. So there are issues of water quality which can be resolved. But in the end, until we can get a price, until we know what water we've got to sell, what other additional costs are still going to become part of this whole business, then we cannot, and neither can the board, make the kinds of decisions. What we asked at the confidential meeting at our previous meeting is not the same as what I've presented in clause 5 today. And I'm not going to discuss what the other one was, but it is different. There's a different purpose and a different reason. So I hope you will support this, because I think it is important that we do get the right advice to protect our ratepayers' interests in this project. So I hope you will support.
Councillor Monso, thank you. You raised a serious allegation that the water that we're putting down in the trial is polluted. I haven't heard that. Could you clarify what the...
Yes, it was actually in our representative on the Irrawaddy Board's report in the last meeting. On the last page of our papers, it actually said that. About second sentence down.
Okay, thank you.
From Jeff Lloyd.
I think there was a context on that which you've left out. But anyway, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Motion is carried. And I will say, Councillor Davis, I was somewhat dismissive of your amendment. I think it was, when you explained your purpose, I accepted it was good. we move on to our annual business plan and budget on page 55, and Councillor Piggott, you've pulled this motion for debate.
I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, this is a very long motion, as budget motions always are every year, because it's got a lot to do. I am proposing the officer's recommendation unchanged. And the reason I'm doing that is that it comes at the end of a process where we put out a draft budget which we spent quite a lot of work, a lot of time on, sort of thrashing out and arguing over, and put it out to consultation, and the consultation process has been pretty positive towards it. It hasn't really thrown up anything that we should take a serious relook at in regard to what went out to consultation. And the reason for that is that it is actually a pretty good budget. It talks about a 2.7% rate increase, which is less than the local government price index of the equivalent period. It offers up a surplus of around $500,000, which is 1% of revenue, which is where it's probably at the low end of where we wanted to be, but it's right, I think, in that we're not here to necessarily stack away surpluses, or significant surpluses anyway. It's also a budget that picks up a couple of extra costs this year that we didn't really see coming. One was the issue coming out of the recyclables and the changes of the rules in regard to China and how much of our plastic and paper they're willing to take. And it also picks up the cost of an election in an election year. And it does all those things, I think, while maintaining all the services that are enjoyed by the people of Burnside, and keeps the city on an even keel. So for that reason, I feel there isn't a need to change anything in regard to the budget that's been presented tonight, and for that reason, I feel we should accept this motion as put, and accept it for the coming year.
Thank you. I seek a seconder. Councillor Davey.
I'm happy to second the motion. I thank the staff for all of their work and care that they've taken in preparing this, with some challenges that have been outlined, and particularly with the current political climate, with the rate capping hanging over our heads, that whole issue hanging over our heads. We had a very good and involved public consultation and community engagement process, so I'm very pleased with that. And I think this is a very fair budget in all the circumstances, so I'm happy to second it.
No further debate? Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I do support the proposed rate increase of 2.7% and the rating policy as indicated, but regrettably, again, I cannot support the business plan. And the reason I have is that it is predicated on debt, long-term debt, over 20 years. In that way, in 1 year, our debt is going to increase 30% in the next financial year. Our net financial liabilities ratio will increase 30% too, to 46%. So 100% net financial liability ratio has been quoted by various people and the LGA who do lend money, I know, that's an acceptable level, but that is for an expanding and developing council. Our growth is 0.5 to 1%. We're not in that position, and it's not going, the debt that we're raising is not towards productivity. Unfortunately, we're not addressing our costs. You know, we see increasing elevations of wages and salaries. In fact, in the Statement of Comprehensive Income and Expenditure, they go up 5.6%, and there are other comparable councils with 15% less wages and salaries. Our legal expenses are unjustifiably huge, and they put the recycling cost and some of these other expenses to you know, in the shadows because the legal expenses are so great. We've seen work cover claims increase by 1,200% in 3 years. That's to $200,000 in 2017. These accounts, rightly, do not account for off-balance sheet exposures. And we've heard about ERA Water. They've got a $375,000 deficit, and the future of that is not entirely clear. We've got Brownhill and Keswick Creek flood mitigation scheme. We've got the Civic Centre that has been put forward and projected into the term of the next council, but all of those things and others are potential expenditure. And the long-term financial plan, the 10-year plan, ties the hands of the subsequent council from 2022 by reducing the new capital expenditure by 70% thereafter. That's how it's structured. And their debt will increase to a net financial liabilities ratio of 51% then. So I note the preamble to the document of the business plan. It says, in fact, the Mayor says that he's pleased with the collegiate steering of financial future and the legacy by November 2018. Well, the legacy will be a legacy of debt, of 20 years of debt and millions of dollars in interest payments. And it's not a proposition from my perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Personally, I think our debt position is fantastic, especially considering the assets we've got for it. We've got the Burnside pool, we've got the Glenunga hub, we've got Conningham Street on the way, we've got footpaths, we've got the library, we've got a myriad of infrastructure that we've actually put in place. Now, there's been a bit of a change of tune, I think, in regards to debt. Now it's, in future, there will be other people want to spend money. It's okay for them to spend money, but it's not okay for us to spend money. Well, I say, shouldn't we be putting in our infrastructure now so that they have everything they need in that in the future? Should we not cop the criticism of future generations by saying, why don't you go and invest in footpaths? Why is everything falling to pieces? Why don't you build a new pool? Why don't you investing in Conningham Street? Why did you leave it up to everybody else to do it 10 years down the track? Why didn't you take the initiative years ago? Take the Snowy Mountain scheme, for example. If they didn't do that then and said, oh, somebody else will figure it out in the future, we wouldn't be enjoying the benefits of it now. The fact is that the debt that we're going into is fantastic debt because it's infrastructure for our community and we're still running surpluses. It will be paid off. It will be paid off like anybody else. I think most people in this room would have debt. I have debt. I have a house, I have a loan that I'm going to be paying off for the next 20 years. But in return for that, I have a house to live in and I have a capital asset which is going to continue to appreciate. Now in these circumstances, what you're going to get is our public is going to benefit from the Glenunga hub. You've got 20 years worth of people going there and taking senior yoga classes. You've got how many generations of children going through the Burnside pool learning how to swim? How many people are going to go to the men's shed and get the benefits from that? How many trees are going to be grown at the Conningham Street depot? Now, if you say that that's bad debt, that that's a waste of time, that maybe somebody else should do it, well, I think that's a catastrophe. I think it's turning now to our rate percentage, especially the feedback from our residents in section 12.12. It was interesting to see that
Excuse me, Councillor Davis.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Hartley and Mr. Jacobson, if you make one more sound, I'll be asking you to leave. Now, please be quiet. Thank you. That's enough. This is your final warning for both of you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I note in point 16.3 that 8.9% of the respondents supporting a rate increase of greater than 2.7%, enabling faster debt repayment. So we have 10% of those people who commented on our budget actually said that they want to pay down debt faster, and the vast majority said that they were happy with that rate increase. So I think that should very much give us an indication of how our community feels about debt and also the projects which we are undertaking. Most importantly, this is not we're not paying for more staff, we're not paying for out-of-pocket expenses or things like that. These are capital projects that we're spending on. There's not one-off, cash reimbursements to our residents or whatever, or discounts to rates. I think I'm very fearful of the rate cap coming in. At the local government conference that I attended last week, I spoke with a lot of councillors from Victoria, and they noticed that their debt had massively increased, that their assets had deteriorated, and that their residents were crying out for that infrastructure, and the councils had to say, we can't do it because we're getting rate capped. So, in fact, I'm quite glad that we are doing these capital projects now, before that rate capping comes in, so we can actually deliver the infrastructure for the future. It sounds like a line off Utopia, but it has very real impact for our residents here as they visit our libraries. So I'm very anxious about that, but I still think that we shouldn't, or we're accused of it in the media of trying to anticipate this, but we are less than LGPI and our cost of business is 4.2%. So we are a very responsible council. We have a good amount of debt, I believe, and we're investing in our future. And to continue to diss that is disappointing. But I think that paragraph 16 speaks for itself, and that the consultation on our budget has come back with overwhelming approval. So I commend this to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually want to speak in favour of the budget. I think it is a good budget at 2.7% increase in offering 118 services. Unlike Councillor Ford, I'm a little bit optimistic. Okay, we've got some debt. If we didn't do some asset infrastructure improvements now, it would be far more expensive in years to come. Let's face it, we have assets, we have inherited colonial buildings from the past. Our residents actually treasure those assets that we have, those heritage assets. Not only that, we have improved our facilities. That's our responsible thing to do, to provide for not only our generation but also my grandchildren's generation. That is what we are doing, and we're doing it very well. I thank the staff for their effort in actually putting together a comprehensive annual report and to actually articulating our achievements really well. So I support the 2.7%. It's affordable. We're providing the library services, the community services, not only here at the City of Burnside, but also at Glenunga, but also at Eastwood, and also at Pepper Street and Kensington. These are things that our generation will have the time to participate in when they stop working. But not only that, we're looking after our assets, i.e. the trees around, and we're still needing to improve those. I can't wait for the urban tree strategy coming soon. The art gallery, my friends all tell me we have the best library in the metropolitan area. They vote with their feet, as do children vote with their togs and go to the swimming pool, and the sporting facilities. We have Glenunga Hub that is absolutely blown out of all proportion. We have to support our community centres. There are burgeoning numbers of young girls and young boys participating in sport. I support the budget as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cornish.
Thank you, Mayor Parkin. Yes, I do support the budget and the motion as it stands. The budget is well done, as always. It covers off a lot. The community surveys and engagement that we do with our budget is bar none in Metropolitan Adelaide. We get the most engagement. I do note that councillors down in Onkaparinga, even with all of their issues, had a public meeting where no one rocked up and the councillors were just taking photographs or selfies of themselves with an empty chamber. So I thought that was quite interesting. So I am very supportive of what we do here. I do have an issue with Councillor Ford's question of debt. I don't think it's even this council's issue. That decision was made many, many councils ago when the tsunami of assets that needed to be replaced were not budgeted for and saved for. You know, the city of Campbelltown saw that wave coming, and they've saved up a war chest of $40 million to replace all their streets, their curbing, their footpaths. This council chose not to do that and keep rates low. We've got the second lowest rate in the dollar in metropolitan Adelaide. Second lowest rate in the dollar in metropolitan Adelaide is the city of Burnside. And I think that is very commendable that we have been so efficient in keeping that rate so low. You look at our neighbouring councils and you're paying almost a third more if you go across the street for a similar sized dwelling, a third more. So instead of $2,000, you're paying $3,000 for your rates. So I think we have done very good in that. And in doing so, though, we have to borrow to actually replenish them, replenish our assets, and we have to actually pay them off over the next 20 odd years. So our current ratepayers that are actually using it, not the ratepayers of 20 years ago, are actually paying for those assets. So I'm quite happy with the decision that previous councils have made in terms of where the money should be coming from for this asset renewal. And I think debt is the most appropriate turn to do that, given the price of debt is so cheap at the moment compared to when it was probably back in the 80s. So which is probably what feared the Burnside Council of yesteryear from actually going down, a different road. So look, I'm very supportive of the budget as it stands. I'm very scared of what rate capping is going to do and how it will impact, certainly with our community engagement. I don't think those sort of timelines have been nutted out perfectly in the number of community engagements that will have to occur. I'm also fearful of what I'm hearing from those Victorian councils where bridges are falling down and they can't even afford to replace a bridge for transportation purposes. So the impacts of rate capping will be quite large, but that's for another council and another day. Thank you very much for the budget that you've presented to us, and I will fully support it.
Thank you, Councillor Monteau.
Whilst I share, whilst I share some of the concerns, is that right now? Sorry?
Yes, why did you turn it off 15 times?
Lemon, will you please turn yours on?
Apologies.
Councillor Monteau, turn yours on. We're okay. Thank you.
Is that right now?
Now, Councillor.
Mine went red and that's why I turned it back on to green, so.
You can turn yours back on. You can press your button again. Thank you.
Oh,
Go on.
okay. Look, as I said, while I support a lot of the things that Councillor Ford has already said, I actually also support a lot of things that Councillor Cornish has said. I am concerned about debt. I think anyone who lives in this world today has to be concerned about debt, whether it be personal debt or council debt. But I also am concerned that when I got on council nearly 8 years ago, when we started to examine the assets that we had, there had been an awful lot of neglect. And as a result of that neglect, we've had to act as a council, and the next council will have to continue to take action as well. And they will be up against it even more with potential of rate capping. And my biggest concern, because I am very much about the health and well-being of our community, the physical as well as the emotional health of our community, then everything that we do and we provide for our residents, the most vulnerable things that are going to go as a result of rate capping are going to be those ones who hold and bind our community together and that create that sense of belonging, and all the issues that are so important in terms of as you age or as a young person, about the connections that you have with your community. So in spite of my concerns about debt, in spite of my concerns about, because of my concerns about rate capping, and the first things that are most likely to go are those things that we do as a council that are not legislated for. And that's my big concern. So I think the more that we can do now at this point in time to support our community, then we should. I was also quite impressed by the responses from the 579, and I was actually hoping that some of those responses might be incorporated as part of our whole overview of our community, along with our community surveys that we do more formally. Because I think that our residents were saying a number of things that were useful, and when you look at those things, most of them are to do with our health and well-being. So there are certainly things that I would like to see within our budget done differently. Some things that I think there should be more money spent on or less money spent on. But that's how we all feel sitting around this table, probably how we all feel in this room. But one thing I've learned about being in council is that you can't please everybody all the time. So somewhere decisions are going to be made that are going to hurt some people and make other people feel happy. So the issue for me is it's not the best budget ever, but it's the best budget that we can provide, and I do thank the staff for all the work that has gone into this budget. It's not an easy task, and I think we are doing the best we can under the circumstances, and I commend the budget and I will support it, in spite of my concern about debt.
Thank you, Councillor Monceau. Councillor Lemon.
Thank you. I too support the budget. I won't add to what other people have said at great length, except to say I don't support the philosophical problem that Councillor Ford and Councillor Monceau have regarding debt. I'm very proud of what Burnside's done in the last 8 years in terms of refreshing the infrastructure that had been let to go to rack and ruin. I'm very proud of the new builds, and I'm very proud of the builds that we've got passed recently that will come to fruition in the next couple of years. I think that our debt to asset ratio is something that most households would actually love to have. So I think that we do very well. Rate capping is going to be an issue, but probably more of an issue for other councils and country councils in particular than it will be for Burnside in the short term. We don't know what will happen in the long term, but I thank administration for putting together a really well-structured budget that meets most of the needs that we have, and it is well-structured, that keeps rates very low in a city that provides a lot for its residents. It provides one of the best libraries in the metropolitan area, well, the best library in my opinion, including the State Library really in a lot of ways. An excellent pool, excellent parks, excellent green spaces, beautifully maintained verges, good roads, curbs, the whole box and dice. We do that, and we do that at a rate that is cheaper for this city than it is for most others. And I think good on you, administration, for coming up with this, and good on you for administration for actually continuing doing your excellent work year in, year out in such an efficient and cost neutral sort of way. I'm proud to have been part of this.
Concludes the debate. Councillor Piggott, may I put the motion? Before I do, there have been a number of lovely compliments paid to the administration for the way the budget has been structured, presented, made understandable, and for the very good response we've got from the public, both in numbers and in support. It is unprecedented, actually, in local government in South Australia, what we managed to do. It's a credit to you, it's a credit to the administration, it's a credit to the CEO and his staff. So thank you from me. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Division has been called by Councillor Ford. All those in favour, please stand. Those in favour are Councillors Monceau, Lemon, Wilkins, Davis, Piggott, Davey and Cornish. Those against, Councillor Ford. Motion is carried. Davey, the request for service and customer service and public interaction policy, it's a review on page 167. You have pulled this for debate.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I just have an amendment to, firstly, part 1, that the report be received, and that 2 becomes that Council adopt the revised request for service policy with all references made in the interpretation so it's, if you can just go back to references made in the interpretation. Oh, sorry. Oh no, wait a minute, you might have it right. all references to member of the public in the interpretation, preceded by residents and ratepayers. So I'll read that out. That council adopts the revised request for service policy with all references to members of the public in the interpretation, preceded by residents and ratepayers. And 3, that council adopt the revised customer service and public interaction policy, again with all references to members of the public in the interpretation, preceded by residents and ratepayers.
Your point being, I think, Councillor Davey, that where references are made to the public, you want that to be more specific.
That's right. That's my only intent.
Is there any problem with that from the... Okay, thank you.
So it's just to, I mean, there's great work done and it needed to be revised. I think it's been simplified in relation to EM feedback to an original draft. It's just that we are indeed here, as we've just discussed, to support our residents and ratepayers. That's our whole raison d'etre. And we actually serve them. And the administration serve them. So I just wanted this made clear up front that they're not just members of the public. We do have other members of the public who are relevant, but it's our residents and ratepayers who take precedence. And the same applies with so that's in both the request for service policy and in the customer service and public interaction policy, probably not to the greatest extent because there's more customers, yes, a whole greater degree of customers. The only other change I would make, or clarification, and this is up to the staff, is that while this is a public document, or both of them are public documents, there are also quite a few internal documents referenced, the procedures, or some protocols and some guides, and I think these could probably be identified up front as internal documents because people on the website might look at them and see that this document's called up, but they can't access it. So that's just a decision for you guys to make. But otherwise, they're great policies. I commend them to you with those changes made to emphasise our residents and ratepayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. I seek a seconder, which may well be Councillor Davis. Sorry, Councillor Monso.
I'm happy to second this, and I just wanted to add, we have mentioned in the statutory list, the South Australian Public Health Act. Can we please also add into the policy the better health policy in there as well? Because my communication with people, generally it's the stress levels that people feel when they contact me in relation to issues to do with customer service or responses. So I think those sorts of things do have an impact on people's mental health and sometimes eventually on their physical health as a result. So I think that just needs to be included. But apart from that, I'm quite happy with the updating of the policy.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, sorry, forgive me, I'm slightly confused about what this motion does. Sorry.
After question.
What does it mean? What does it do?
The motion itself.
Yeah.
The motion that Councillor Davies slightly amended really hasn't changed the original motion. And the context of the original motion escapes you?
Is the effect of this change to put the words residents and ratepayers before the word public?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so then it would say it would say residents and ratepayers public.
And members.
So it would say residents and ratepayers and members of the public.
Correct.
Shouldn't there be a comma? Yeah.
I think we'll fix it up with the slip rule, but that's certainly the context. Thank you. There's any further debate on this matter? Then debate's closed. Councillor Davey, may I put the motion?
I'll just clarify if other people might be confused. The interpretation for the first one, for the request for service and customer service, is page 172, and and it says customer means a member of the public who requests council to take some form of action to provide or improve a council service. I'm just asking that it be customer means a resident and ratepayer or member of the public. And then it's the same in the other. I mean, it'll be worked out. Resident and ratepayer.
Resident, ratepayer, or
Member of the public.
Well, and then that means that unless they're, and is a bad word, it should.
I'm sure, Councillor Davis, that the staff will work out an appropriate wording. We all know the context. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? The motion's carried unanimously. Ford, you've pulled the matter of our parking policy review, page 215.
Thank you, Worship. I wish to move the officer's recommendation with one addition, a point 3, that the administration will continue to review parking zones and report to council in 3 months.
Before I accept that, can you just clarify, my recollection is that we are reviewing parking zones as part, am I right? And if so, what context, what's the timing and how does this affect it?
Well, as I understand it, we are looking.
Administration, let's get the question.
Through the chair, yes, we are. We had originally set aside around 6 months to review all the parking restrictions. If we were to report in 3 months, we could simply report their findings to that date. Whether or not we can actually do anything other than provide a information update, given the caretaker period is not clear at this stage, but we could certainly provide an update, whether that be by report or info-doc.
My understanding is that where zones are is a matter of delegation to the administration. It's not a matter of council decisions. So it wouldn't matter when you report it, would it?
Through the chair, that's right. I mean, we regularly do change parking restrictions under delegation. I'm aware of the occasional one that has come to council, but generally it's done at administrative level.
So, were this motion of Councillor Ford, or this slight amendment to the officer's recommendation, you asking the administration to continue to review parking zones and report back to council in 3 months? You can meet that. He's not saying complete it by then. He's saying give us a report by then. Are you happy with, could you handle that? It'll be a status update.
I'm happy with 6 months.
We'll make it 6 months? Then that would fit within your time frame?
We would be more likely to be finished in 6 months.
So that could be in the context of also a review of the effectiveness of our new parking policy as well, couldn't it? Which you might like to add that in, Councillor Ford.
Yes.
Well, I guess it's also a matter of when Councillor Ford is asking for review of parking zones, my interpretation of that is he's asking it to be foremost of the minds of the administration and making changes as appropriate. I don't know what else you think it means, Councillor Ford, and maybe you can elaborate. So that's the motion we have, and you must speak.
Your Worship. Well, in the first instance, I would like to compliment the administration on revising the parking policy to this extent. I think, you know, they have touched on some important matters that have concerned some people in the community who are affected more directly by the parking policy. And, you know, it's never going to be possible to satisfy everybody. I think the point's been well made by others tonight and other matters. But I think this does go a considerable distance to attending to the needs of businesses, employees of those businesses, clients of those businesses, as well as it's pretty fair, I think, to residents. I know that some have a few niggles about it, but the amendments that have been made or the modifications, I think satisfy most of the complaints that have been made to me. Just with respect to the report about a review of parking zones, I was aware that this had been undertaken, was commencing, but I wasn't really clear about any end point in that regard, and I do think that with a new policy like this, that it is not unreasonable to ask for some time period for information to council, if even though council may not control that process. But I think it would be courteous to the ratepayers, to those who are affected, and I just think it would be good process. So I'd ask you to support it.
Thank you. I seek a seconder on this matter. Councillor Davis, you're first in. Do you wish to second it?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'll speak to it. I think that this is I wouldn't give the administration all the credit. I think we talked about it last time, but they certainly have implemented other things such as reducing the cost to $15. And I do agree with that it should stay at that rate. What it does is means that you won't apply for the maximum allocation every single time. So it does put a small barrier there, a very small barrier. But it also gives us a better appreciation of how many permits are actually being used by our residents. So when you have a street which has 80 parks and there's 120 permits, what is the allocation? And I think it's one of the most difficult discussions for any government to have is the allocation of scarcity. And what I think we did last time was to continue to push forward with this and consider it and try to adapt it over time is the appropriate response. And I'm very keen to see how this works, because to me these two matters, especially in 2.2 and 2.1, fix many of the concerns that residents had, which is about the transferability of those permits. So it's going to be an ongoing thing, and scarcity is always a problem for any government, and it's always a difficult thing. So our duty here is to ensure that we have an equitable allocation of that scarce resource, something that means that everyone gets some, and rather than just somebody with the most cars then gets the most car parks. So I think that this is a difficult problem for us, one that we will continue to watch, and one that we need to continue to receive feedback on. But this is a step, I believe, in the right direction, and if it's not, then we can continue to evaluate that. But I believe we should push on with this process despite some of the concerns, because at the end of the day, there will be teething problems with this. There will be people who are anxious about this change. The only way we can really find is to try and see how it works for us. I know that Unley has their policies, but they don't have the specific circumstances that we do. So we are learning from our neighbour councils, but it will always be different for us. And so small steps and continuing to listen to our community is the only way forward on this.
Thank you. Councillor Piggott.
Yeah, I haven't got much more to add apart from the fact I think it has been a good process. There's been a bit of angst in it, but it is a fairly major change in policy. It was brought in for the right reasons. It does the right things, and it did upset a few people around the edges, some of which have been should be quite happy with the changes coming through tonight, which will actually, respond quite well to the issues that have been raised. And it's good. I did like in the report how that each specific issue that people had with parking was actually responded to, and that is a very useful way for us to judge whether it is a good thing to go forward or not. So yeah, I commend the process, both elected members and administration.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Yes, I endorse those comments too. And I think, we've really gone through a lot of angst over this in terms of looking at what is the fairest and most equitable way to manage parking for about 20,000 households across Burnside, in line with all the businesses that operate and the people who want to move through the city. I think the key to this, in an ongoing iterative way, because it is being reviewed constantly, is to have transferable permits. I think that gives a lot more flexibility. The other issue that's been raised with me is about enforcement and how, where some people are really inconsiderate in taking up large areas of parking or parking right in the middle when there are 2, 3 parks and monopolising car parks. And I just wondered how our enforcement activities will look at this, or is there anything we can actually do about that in terms of monitoring the parking policy as it's being implemented? Thank you.
You got a question? Yes. Did you get that question? The question is, if I can paraphrase it, what, if anything, can our enforcement officers do to when parking is not in an inappropriate place, but it's in an appropriate location in relation to spaces? So it's taking up more space than it should. That's your point, isn't it?
Through the chair, unfortunately, there's not a lot they can do about that. As long as someone is parked legally between signs, they're able to do that. The only way I think that practice can be regulated is where you see, for example, perhaps in Glenelg, you have actually lined and marked bays. If you have lined and marked bays, that practice can be controlled, but in the absence of those, unfortunately, from time to time, there will be someone who's parked in an inopportune location.
Councillor Cornish.
Thank you, Mayor Parkin. I've just got a series of questions just to clarify where exactly the parking policy is at. Every resident with restricted parking in front of their property will get one transferable permit.
Through the chair, that's correct.
They would have got, if they didn't have enough off-street parking, up to an additional 2 fixed permits, which are now going to be 2 transferable permits. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In addition to that, they can, and sorry, I should clarify that those 2 still are costings. They're still under the existing fee structure that Council previously approved back in 22nd of February.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So, and they're still for 2 years, those temporary permits?
Yes.
Thank you. In addition to that, there are now 2 additional temporary permits, one which can be purchased for $15 each. One is for a 1-month period, and the other one is a book of 10 single days.
We envisage the second one to be a card that can be filled out on 10 different occasions, but it's the same principle. And the only other thing to point out in relation to those new transferable ones is they're available to any person in those restricted areas, not just the people with restricted on off-street parking. Those new ones are available broadly across for all people.
So businesses, employees of businesses in areas?
My apologies, no, just residents.
Just residents, yes. So all can purchase those. Are only one available of each of them, or could a resident come in and buy 10 packs of 10?
No, through the chair, we'd be looking at having one each of those available at any one time. So at any one time you'd have one card of 10, not 10.
Okay. Thank you for answering those questions.
So Davis.
Yeah, so what are the restrictions on putting lines in place? You wouldn't have to necessarily put the entire line, you could even put a smaller white line. Is there any restriction on from that happening?
Excuse me, through the chair, I mean, it's a broad question. No, as long as the line itself is appropriately separated or laterally from a driveway.
Yeah.
You see it. You tend to see it in places like the Broadway and other parts of Glenelg, where parking is at a premium, and they try to stack people in an appropriately. It's a way to order car parking.
For sure.
It may be a small problem here, and sometimes you see it as a result of the car that's parked in an inopportune position is there as a result of the previous cars that have been there.
Yeah, that's right.
So you don't know whether it's that car that's
Could happen for days.
been parked inappropriately or in an opportune manner, or whether that's a result of the previous arrangement between that car and other cars. It's something that's probably less of an issue for Burnside, but it's certainly something we could consider if we needed to.
If it does become a problem, would it have to be through, do you know if it had to be a motion through council, or could that request come through via email, I suppose, to consider putting in line parking to say that this is an issue in a specific street? What would be the process to have that happen?
Through the chair, it's something that we could consider administratively.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question through to the administration. I thought we were talking about residential parking permits. And which areas of the city of Burnside do this policy refer to?
Through the chair, that we are talking about residential parking permits, and they apply to any area where there are restricted parking or parking restrictions, usually in terms of times, 2p, 1p. So typically...
Which suburbs?
Typically, I can't probably name them all, but typically it's Eastwood, Dulwich, Rose Park, those inner suburban ones. There are some others, Beulah Park, Glenside, near the Burnside village. So they around the Burnside Hospital as well. So they're typically around high areas of high parking demand.
Thank you. And how many, could I ask through the administration, how many councillors actually have 2 residential parking permits currently? I'm the only one. Thank you.
A question?
I do. I'll wait for Councillor Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I did miss one permit that was available, and I just want to confirm that it's still available. There are temporary exemption permits available for trade persons or service providers. Is this correct?
Through the chair, it is correct. It's still provided for in the policy, and we're not proposing to change that.
Yeah. So that would be for a nanny, a nurse. If you're doing renovations to the house, you could apply for a temporary permit for your tradespeople.
A plumber or a builder.
And that's still available to residents with restricted permits?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes the speakers. Councillor Wilkins, you have a question?
I do have a question. I haven't spoken as yet, Your Worship. I also want to know, right now, I actually have 2 free, as is every resident in Eastwood, for which I represent. Where if they're free, what is proposed? How many permits are free?
Through the chair, I guess the easiest way to answer this is we're talking about 3 periods of time. So there's the period of time prior to February this year where all permits were free. So some people had up to...
Mine have been free for about 20 years, ever since we've had it. Keep going.
And that's that period prior to February this year. Then there's the period between February this year and July. And the council, in February, the council elected to change the parking policy and the fee structure such that there would be 1 free permit, but all subsequent permits after that first free permit would come with a charge. And the 3rd period of time we're talking about is the period of time that will be post-July when we implement the changes that have been intimated in this particular report.
If I may, Your Worship, I'll speak to the motion. I actually don't support the motion. It is actually discriminatory against the residents in my suburb, and in fact that's all of the residents in my suburb. Currently, I have a transferable parking permit which tradespersons have used, which visitors have used, which my family have used when they've come to stay. I have a parking permit which is constantly on the dashboard of my car, as does every other resident. Those people who are small business owners in my suburb of Eastwood also use their transferables. This does not improve their parking permit situation at all. If we have however many transferables, you're still going to charge them. At the moment, you actually respect residents as ratepayers and owners of the property by offering them 2 free parking permits. And this has actually sufficed for quite some time, except somehow or other, those people who are renting properties in John Street have been allowed to access parking permits, which has thrown the kilter out, the balance out of parking in the street. Some residents now have to park in Hawkville Terrace overnight, etc., and walk home. I'm appalled to read in this report that some businesses are canvassing residents to actually purchase parking permits, particularly in Hawkville Terrace. This should not be allowed to happen when the residents in Hawkville Terrace are telling me that they have to keep moving their cars. They're even more terrified about the new system that's coming in, when they won't be able to have visitors, or young mums won't be able to go out, come home, park, etc., get kids inside, the whole bit. You will be affecting all of the residents in Eastwood. And for this reason, I'm not going to support it. I've spoken before about the transferable and the fixed permit work. They're both free. You support the residents who are ratepayers and owners of properties in inner city suburbs in Burnside. If you look on the rates valuations from the Valuer General, all those inner city suburbs have gone up by about 7% this past 12 months. I can't support this. My residents are basically up in arms and are just appalled that you are not going to support them with free permits.
Councillor Cornish, you have a question?
I don't have a question. I'm actually going to speak to the motion.
You may.
Thank you. I thank the administration for some sound work. I think it's a step in the right direction for this council to provide those 2 additional transferable permits under the policy. I really do appreciate the work that's been put in and the thought that's been put in, and the administrative burden that's, I think, going to provide to the council in providing them. Unfortunately, my residents have made representations to me since this agenda's come out, and have certainly asked me not to vote for this, for similar lines that Councillor Wilkins have just outlined in terms of having to pay to park in front of their own home. So I do believe that the change in the policy, the parking policy here in this instance is probably a good one for the future of Burnside, but my residents have certainly asked me not to endorse it and would prefer to go back to the old parking policy. So for that, I unfortunately won't be voting for this motion tonight.
Councillor Davis, you got a question?
Yeah. What can be done, or what's the penalty? Whilst it hasn't happened yet, as far as we're aware, if these single 10-day use cards are sold, how will the administration, is there a way for you to discover that, and then what can be done to prevent that if that happens?
Through the chair, I mean, it does provide difficulty. In one sense, one might argue that it might not matter. I mean, each card will have a unique number on it. So if someone does sell a card and claim they've lost it, and we find the original one being used, then we've got a mechanism there to cancel one of those. But if they on-sell it and don't seek another one, there's no net gain in the amount of parking permits in the community. It's just a transfer of them from a residential base to a commercial base. So unless they try to seek a second card, we're probably not a lot we can do about that.
Councillor Piggott, question.
I just had a question, yes. I just picking up on Councillor Cornish's residents saying having to pay to park in front of their own homes. Can you just confirm to me that if I lived in Councillor Cornish's ward, or if in any others, in truth, and I wanted to park in front, the one space in front of my house, you would give me one pass free of charge?
Through the chair, that's correct. Every person or every household in an area that's subject to restrictions gets one free one.
However, let's make it clear, it's not to park in front of your own house. You've got no guarantees where it can park. Anyone can park in front of your house.
I was purely addressing the specific charge.
Thank you. Debate is over.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I think the administration has responded to the main concerns that have been brought to my attention. The remaining one, of course, is the question that Councillor Wilkins raises about the charge, and Councillor Cornish. Again, I think that is a very small charge. It's $50 for 2 years and $25 for people with concession cards. So it's not a large amount of money. And the goal of having it at all is really because there are some streets, so I'm informed from the previous report prior to us approving the change policy, where there are many more permits than parking spaces, and unfortunately some residents haven't obliged by utilising their own off-street parking. So it's an attempt to try to find a way through that. I think the next review over the next 6 months of the zones may help to address some of those matters. But again, I see currently this is a compromise that I would support.
Thank you. I put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Motion is carried. Division is called by Councillor Wilkins. Do you call it? Who called the division? I did. Okay. Those in favour, please stand. All those in favour are Councillors Monceau, Lemon, Davis, Piggott, Davey and Ford. Those against are Councillors Wilkins and Cornish. Motion is carried. And the final motion tonight in this tranche is the tree canopy action, an update and revision. Councillor Lemon, you've pulled this. It's on page 223.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've proposed an amendment to this, which I've given to Robert. So my amendment is that the report be received, that Council adopt the revised Canopy Action Plan 2018 to 19. Then I add a new point 3, that Council works towards incorporating, and I'll just read it to you because Robert will be doing it, the Canopy Action Plan into a zone overlay for the new State Planning Act, and the number 4 becomes that administration provide a progress report to Council on the Canopy Action Plan 2018-19 in February 2019.
So your two changes to the officer recommendation is you actually have
an extra thing that I wanted to do, yes.
You have kept number 3 but changed it from June to January.
Yes.
And you've included a line associated with a zone overlay for the new State Planning Act.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. And the reason I've done this is that while this is an excellent report, I don't believe it goes far enough, and I don't believe it's comprehensive enough for the things that we do. And if I'll address the first part, my new part 3 first, we are currently in the process of looking at technical discussion papers for the new Planning Act. Since the new government took over in March, We have no idea where they stand on trees, where they stand on the tree canopy. The previous government's 30-year plan for Greater Adelaide looked at tree canopy for the inner metro ring. We don't know whether that's still part of what is going to be policy. We don't know whether what is going to be policy in the new planning acts, the zones and the overlays are going to actually relate to trees. And I think we have a very good opportunity here to start incorporating our canopy action plan, and there's already been a lot of work done on this, with administration have got huge amounts of information already, and I think it would be remiss of us not to start using this information and using it to agitate for action in terms of any development plans that fall within our zone. My understanding, and it's I'll give you a very quick, my understanding of how the new Act is going to work is that they're going to be zones and they're going to be fairly standard. So the planning portal will have whatever zone it is. What you'll get in areas is an overlay. So for Eastwood, one would hope that we had a heritage overlay. For McGill, parts of McGill, there'll be a heritage overlay, and there'll be bits of that in other parts of our city. What we should be aiming for here is to have a canopy overlay as well. And while that might not get up, I think we should be working towards that, given that we've already got a lot of software that gives us heaps of information about our tree canopy. So that's why I want to put that in there. I think that it would be remiss of us not to address it in this canopy action plan. I very much like the idea of having... Thank you. You done? I very much like the idea of having citizen scientists in this plan, but I don't think it goes far enough. I actually think that everything in here is a good idea, but I don't think it goes far enough. I think what we need to do, what this plan talks about, is identifying verge trees and identifying trees on public land, identifying them, documenting them, and so that we've got a snapshot of what we've got and we've got a snapshot of where the bare spots are. I think if we're going to get citizen scientists involved in this, we are in an absolutely fantastic position to identify trees on private land as well, which we can overlay on our identifying the trees that we own as council. So I think that that needs to be part of the plan, and I think that we could have some very good information about privately owned trees that then becomes part of our zone overlay when we look at our new planning legislation for the new Act. I think we've got to include our tree strategy, and that it does make mention of it, but I think we need to make more of it in the climate change plans that we've got, where we've got hotspots, where we've got a variety of things happening. I think that as we look at overlays for our zone, we need to make much of the fact that trees will assist with climate change. And it's not just for climate change. I'm really concerned about our lack of biodiversity in terms, I read somewhere, and I don't know whether the source was good or not, but the world's actually lost 75% of its insects. Our bees are under stress. I think we need to look at this as a biodiversity issue as well. So I hope you support what I'm suggesting, and when I sum up, I will talk about a few other things that are part of this that I think we can expand on. But I think we need to bring it closer to February 19, because the Planning Act and the overlays will be in place in 2020, and I don't think we've got any time to waste between now and then.
Thank you, Councillor Lemon, and the CEO's. My conversation was actually complimenting you on the insights of your analysis. Councillor Davey, do you wish to second this motion?
Yes, I've done the wrong thing. Yes, I commend Councillor Lemon for her initiative. It's been my concern as well. I mean, this plan is fantastic, and I commend Ben and Alan and all of the team for all of the work that you've put into developing this and all the initiatives that this starts to work on. I agree with Councillor Lemon that this is the start of the process and we could be doing more. And because we've got this opportunity with the planning changes and whatever they may be, I think we have to be right in there, working with our development people, because while we're focusing on street trees and the trees in our parks and reserves, it also concerns me greatly that we're losing the trees in our homes and not having enough strategies to ensure retention of these, especially during the development process. So I think this is a good initiative, and I also approve of bringing forward the report to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Monso.
Just a quick one. I wanted to say commend the fact that you did include the public health plan. And I love those comments, and that last part, the urban forest interactive, page 246 through to the end, where it does actually make that connection between how important trees are for our healthy mind and healthy body. And I think that the other comment I wanted to make was that Councillor Osterstock asked a question about the number of trees that have been planted in Burnside as one of his questions. I think a more pointed question would be to ask how many have been removed from Burnside, to balance out that what we're replacing with, because that's really where it's important. Is what are we losing? And I was watching a television program the other night. Unfortunately, it wasn't in this country, but we have the same problem here, where people just chop out the tree because it's obstructing their view. And I've seen that on Caithness Avenue with loss of massive, beautiful big gum trees because they've been cut down to give people a view of the city of Adelaide. So that really does upset me when that happens.
Thank you, Councillor Cornish.
Just waiting for a councillor to...
It's not me.
Oh, it's me. I'm actually...
Sorry, Councillor Wilkins, you may be
That's
next.
my name. Thank you, Your Worship. Now I've lost my train of thought. Yes, this is an excellent idea. I'm speaking particularly from planning, because the first thing that comes to my mind is the tree that is left standing in the middle of a vacant block on Tusmore Avenue. There's a Metricon development happening on the corner of Stattenborough and Tusmore. Watch that tree, because if that's not here marked, it's going to go somehow or other. They took all the other trees out.
Let's just stick to the
Yes,
policy
it's
rather
planning.
than other
Thank
civics.
you very much. That is most important, and identifying those trees out there on private land that are really very significant, not only for size but also for heritage in this city. And I also talk about other cork oak trees. There's a row of them. I can't exactly tell you where, but they need to be mapped before somebody removes those as well. And all the other trees around the heritage homes that are in this city are what we need to identify and scare the pants off all the developers by putting them on a map. So for all this, I think that's really important. I also think it's important that we do up the education, and I'm hopeful that we do have a Work for the Dole scheme happening that will actually come into your objective under education. So, excellent idea, and thank you for the report.
Well said, Councillor Cornish this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Parkin. Fully support some of the comments that other elected members have said. We'll also point out Walkerville did talk you up and compliment the work that we've been doing here on the urban forest. When I went over to their stall on Saturday. Great work that you're doing. Great initiative from Councillor Lemon incorporating with the development planning zones. I'd like to see it go one further and actually, for a zone, actually put a minimum percentage of that zone that has to be green space. That would probably be the best way to do it. So that we've actually got a dead set, this is the guide of how much open green parkland, trees, gardens are required in a zone. I think that's the way we have to do, not the other way around where we talk about how the size of property or the size of development, we need to actually earmark and make sure that we do have that green space. the great initiatives, fantastic getting people out there into the urban forest, reselling what the urban forest is about too. So I think it's a great step forward. The app is great. I've been telling lots of people about it, so great work.
Councillor Davis.
I suppose very, very briefly, I think it is, the thing that I find tragic, I suppose, is in that development plan when they have all those percentages and say this much can be a house, this percentage can be, needs to be unpaved area and this much can be paved, blah, blah, blah. And then the applications that come through aren't even close to what those percentages should be. And I agree very much with Councillor Cornish that different areas should be able to set, well, paraphrase you a bit, but different areas should be able to set how much green space they have. So, for example, in Mawson Lakes, for example, where they build on the entire block. If you want to go and do that there, that's fine. But the reason why you moved to Burnside, exactly right. The reason why you moved to Burnside is because you enjoy the greenery. Otherwise, you'd go to if you want to live inside, then go to Mawson Lakes. But if you come here, I believe that you value trees. And I think that that's one of the principal reasons why the house prices in Burnside are so expensive. And it's one of the reasons why my wife and I wanted to move here. And so it is a bit of a prisoner's dilemma. I learned that in economics, in game theory, and it's the idea that I'll chop down my trees, I get the benefit, but then I won't let anybody else do it. Hopefully nobody else will chop down theirs and I'll enjoy their trees next door. But unfortunately that's not how it works. You have one chops down theirs and the next one everyone's chopping down trees, and all of a sudden you lose the entire benefit of living in Burnside. So it's a very small gain, and I think coming back to it, this policy and this plan of us to reinforce the beauty of the trees and saying that this urban forest is what makes this place such a beautiful place to live in. And you see that in Canberra. That's how it was planned. Is that Canberra has a fantastic. They did that from the beginning. They planned that out, and they understood. They call it the bush capital because of the number of the trees. Yes, there are kangaroos jumping through the middle of the streets as well, but they planned that out and they said this is how people want to live. And so it is very much a race to the bottom. And whilst in South Australia it's a losing battle, I think that the next election for all of us can be a way to reinforce that. And I think it should be something we can use that platform to go out to our communities and say this is what I support. So I know Councillor Bills isn't here tonight, and is often critical, I suppose, on Councillor's view on trees, but let me reaffirm that I share many of Councillor Bills' passion in terms of preserving trees, and you see them being chopped down a lot, and Canberra has that balance right, and I think that we should certainly push to keep this. So I'd encourage you all to use this during your election and say this is something that I support.
Thank you. That concludes the debate. Councillor Lemon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I thank everyone for their comments, and I would make, in reply, I'd make a few myself. Minimum of green space is a really good idea. That's something that we can put in a zone overlay, and that's where we need to start getting very, very active in putting this sort of stuff forward. The urban forest and living in Burnside Council area there's that balance between the value of the square metre of dirt in Burnside and whether you want a big tree on it. My point with this is, and getting the planning right, is that it ought not just be council's responsibility to maintain the tree canopy. It ought to be everybody's responsibility. No good coming here, knocking down a house, having a slash and burn on your block, and then expecting council to actually plant their verges and actually having different verge crossovers where you kill the trees that are already on the verge, and then complaining that your air conditioning bills are really, really high. I think that we need to get everybody on board with this, and this particular strategy does a lot of it. But as I said, I don't think it goes far enough. And when you look at the end where you've got, we've had clearly gone to someone fantastic to do this education stuff. But again, fantastic concepts, brilliant ideas, and will really, really educate the public, and they'll get T-shirts and caps and bags. But what do we want them to do? Yeah. Once they're educated, what do we want them to do? Do we want them to make placards? Do we want to chain themselves to the tree. There's a second stage to that we haven't actually thought through. And that second stage is agitate to their local member. Make sure that the neighbours are actually really clear about not building a pool in their backyard where the trees are. Make sure that they actually become active in the community in preserving private trees. Make sure that they become citizen scientists where they can in fact help us map. And one of the problems we've had, and I remember we've talked about this before, we don't know where our private trees are. We've mapped pretty much, almost, maybe, we're right in terms of mapping our public trees, but we don't really know where our private trees are, so we don't really know. We can't actually say they've been removed because we don't know where they are. So if we've got citizen scientists, and I'm sure people will absolutely sign up for this, they will help us map our private trees, and once we know where they are, we're in with a chance in terms of preserving them. So I hope you actually support this, and I actually think that we all need to throw ourselves into this and absolutely keep on top of what's happening. Monitor it, ask questions, be involved with administration as this goes forward. And I seek your support.
Thank you. I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. That completes our officers' reports. We have nothing under subsidiaries. There's no council correspondence. Under other business, let me indulge you, please, for a minute or so, and Councillor Monceau, you clearly wish to as well. I wish to briefly bring you up to date on the rate capping debate that the LGA is obviously part of. The LGA is a member organisation, represents councils just like the RAA represents motorists. It has no power. The membership clearly wished the LGA to run a campaign against rate capping. It did it very carefully. It was never targeted against a party, it was targeted against a policy, and it made very clear that that was the case. Now that the Liberal Party has introduced its draft legislation, then the LGA has put a lot of questions back to the Minister. In the end, that will the plan is, at the moment, that sometime in the next couple of weeks there will be an extraordinary general meeting held of councils by the LGA, at which this matter will be debated, and the intention at this stage is that a motion will be crafted on the matter for each council to debate in their own chambers. And so that's something I expect may well be before us at the next council meeting. If certainly not, it'll be the following one. My expectation is that those the outcome of that debate in each council, which will be yes or no of a particular motion, will be brought to the board. And the board, I would expect, would weight those responses in the same way it weights the responses of councils in general meeting, which effectively means councils under, I think, under 20,000 get 1 vote, councils 20 to 50 get 2 votes, councils above 50 get 3 votes. And whatever the outcome of that is, however imperfect that is the position that LGA will take. Now, you might argue it doesn't matter what the LGA takes. If it opposes it, does it make any difference? No, it has to do with its members ask it, that's all. Irrespective of that, there will obviously be negotiations. If the outcome of the membership is they just don't want to support it, then the LGA would be hoping that the Labor Party would oppose it in the upper house. Which should be enough to defeat it. If not, then the LGA will be doing its best to negotiate on certain items within the legislation to make it more acceptable. And it's not actually heavily unacceptable at the moment in the context of it, other than the principle of each level of government should be free to look after itself. So that's where it's at. Any questions I probably can't answer because they're still evolving, but that's my understanding. Councillor Monceau.
I just wanted to say thank you to Council for running an open information day to come on Saturday at Cunningham Street. I think that's a very good idea. I will be very interested to see who bothers to attend. I certainly intend to be there for a little bit. I think it's really good because it was a question that I raised at the last meeting, because we've had those sort of things about the pool. We've also had them for the, obviously, of course, for web development or the hub. So it will be very interesting to see what the comments are from anyone who turns up on Saturday, and I hope the other councillors read it in their info docs from 11 and 3 on Saturday. I think it was 11 and 2. 11 and 2 Saturdays? Yeah.
Yes. You've
No, that was it.
Thank you.
Members, I'd just like to let you know that one of our staff members, member of staff who worked at the depot, Robert Tatani, who'd worked at the council for 30 years, passed away in late May. So I'd just like to make an acknowledgement that he's a very valuable member of our Burnside community, and we had a difficult time in dealing with his passing. He was a loyal and dedicated member of our depot staff, and unfortunately passed away late May, and it was a very difficult time for particularly Alan in his new role to deal with that, as well as Barry and all of us. So I just wanted to commemorate the fact that he was a great guy, worked really hard for the city of Burnside, and we lost a very valuable member of our team.
If obviously the administration is dealing with this the way it sees fit, if it wants some gesture of sympathy from the elected body, then I'm happy to do so.
Through you, Mayor, I think Alan and Barry have done what they needed to do, and have been very supportive of Rob's family, and I think that's probably as much as they would like to have, unless, Barry, you think anything else needs? Okay.
Councillor Wood?
Yes, you just reminded me of something else too. Dean Nicole, has the council mayor, CEO, acknowledged his OAM just recently? Dean Nicole is
yes,
an arborist.
I write to all our recipients. There were 4 this time with the Queen's Birthday Honours. They're on my desk to sign. If he got one, it would be. I don't remember who the 4 were. But if that was one, that was. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think I missed it. Yeah, it was. It was.
I hope so, because he's offered valuable service to not only the council in the past, but also ratepayers.
Look, I could often be in error, but it's rare. Okay. I declare the meeting closed at 9:20 p.m.